the summer of 1976, at a county fair in western Oklahoma, a 16-year-old boy named Caleb Mercer stepped onto a small wooden stage and said something that made an entire crowd laugh. Not because it was a joke, but because nobody believed it could ever happen. "My name is Caleb Mercer," he said, his words catching in his throat. "And one day, I'm going to be an auctioneer." For a second, the tent went quiet. Then the laughter started. A few chuckles at first, then more. Then almost the whole crowd, because Caleb Mercer had a stutter. A hard one. The kind that made simple sentences feel like uphill battles. The kind that made school presentations feel impossible. The kind that made strangers finish his words before he could. And now this boy, who could barely get through his own name under pressure, had just told an entire county fair crowd that he wanted to become an auctioneer, one of the fastest speaking professions in the world. The laughter rolled through the tent like a wave. Caleb stood there, face burning, hands locked around the microphone stand, waiting for it to stop. And then one voice cut through the noise, a deep, confident voice from the front row. "Well, son," the man said, "that's the boldest thing I've heard all day." The speaker was Vernon Hale, big rancher, big landowner, big reputation. In that county, when Vernon Hale laughed, other people usually laughed with him. And he did laugh. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "A boy who stutters wants to be an auctioneer? That's like a man with no legs wanting to race horses." More laughter. Caleb could have walked off the stage. He could have gone quiet. He could have let that be the end of it. Instead, he leaned back toward the microphone and said, "One day, Mr. Hale, I'm going to sell something that belongs to you." Then he stepped off the stage, and nobody in that tent forgot it. Now, to understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand Caleb Mercer. He was born in 1960 in Elk Ridge, Oklahoma, the only son of Daniel and Ruth Mercer. His father worked a modest 140-acre wheat farm, not poor enough to be hopeless, not successful enough to be comfortable. Just one of those families that lived year to year, weather to weather, repair bill to repair bill. His mother taught piano lessons from the front room of the house and kept every dollar she earned in envelopes marked for groceries, fuel, and emergencies. Caleb started stuttering when he was 5. No one really knew why. Doctors said he might grow out of it. He didn't. In fact, the older he got, the worse it became whenever he felt pressure. At school, if a teacher called on him unexpectedly, the words locked up. If a stranger asked him a question, the answer jammed in his throat. If other kids crowded around him, it got even worse. And kids notice weakness fast. They mocked him, interrupted him, imitated him, laughed when he got stuck on simple words. So Caleb did what a lot of people do when the world embarrasses them enough. He got quiet. He learned to avoid speaking. He learned to nod instead of answer. He learned to keep his thoughts to himself. But there was one place where everything changed: the livestock auction. His father started taking him when he was 7, and from the very first time, Caleb was fascinated. The speed, the rhythm, the authority. The way an auctioneer could control a crowd with nothing but timing, tone, and nerve. It felt impossible, and maybe that was part of why he loved it, because auctioneers didn't talk like ordinary people, they chanted. And one evening, alone in the barn, Caleb tried it. He picked up a stick like it was a microphone and started calling imaginary bids to a row of feed buckets. And something strange happened. The stutter eased. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough for the words to move. Enough for him to feel something he had almost never felt before. Freedom. When he spoke normally, his words crashed into each other. But when he found a rhythm, they flowed. Not every time, but often enough to matter. That was the first time Caleb ever felt like maybe the thing people mocked him for wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was the beginning of it. After the disaster at the county fair, Caleb barely spoke for 2 days. His mother worried. His father let him sit with it. On the third night, Daniel Mercer knocked on his bedroom door and stepped inside. "You still mean it?" he asked. Caleb looked up from the floor. "Mean what?" "The auctioneer thing." Caleb swallowed. "Yes, sir." His father nodded once. "Then we better quit talking about whether people laughed and start figuring out how to get you there." A week later, Daniel told him about an auction school in Amarillo, Texas, 3 weeks long. More money than they could easily spare. Far enough away to scare both of them. Caleb knew what that meant. It meant sacrifice. It meant his father believed him, and that mattered more than he could say. At 17 years old, with one suitcase, a borrowed jacket, and money his family should probably have used elsewhere, Caleb Mercer went to auction school. And it was harder than he imagined. There were older students, confident students, fast-talking students, men who had grown up in sale barns and feed yards and seemed built for this world. On the first practice day, every student had to stand at the front and call a mock sale. When Caleb's turn came, he froze. His throat locked, his chest tightened. Nothing came out. A few students looked away awkwardly. A couple smirked. One whispered something under his breath. The instructor, Raymond Cole, didn't interrupt. He just waited. Finally, Caleb shut his eyes and did the only thing he knew to do. He stopped trying to talk and started trying to chant. The numbers came first, then the cadence, then the flow. It wasn't polished. It wasn't fast. It wasn't smooth enough to impress anybody, but it was there. For the first time in public, under pressure, in front of strangers, his voice held. When he finished, the room was silent. Raymond Cole walked up slowly and said, "Son, you don't need pity. You need practice." That became the theme of Caleb's life. Not pity, practice. He was the weakest student in the room on day one. By the end of the first week, he was average. By the end of the third week, he still wasn't the best. But he had something more important than talent. He had proof that this could be learned. Proof that rhythm could carry him where ordinary speech couldn't. Proof that the dream wasn't ridiculous. It was just expensive. Expensive in time, in humiliation, in repetition, in discipline. When he returned home, nothing had magically changed. People still knew him as the stuttering kid. Some still remembered the county fair. Some thought auction school had been a cute little failure waiting to happen. And Vernon Hale? He remembered exactly what Caleb had said to him. That first year was brutal. Small estate sales, tiny farm dispersals, school fundraiser events, any job Caleb could get. He drove everywhere, took low-paying work, practiced until his throat hurt, listened back to recordings of himself, worked on breath control, timing, crowd reading, and confidence. Most of all, he learned something no school could fully teach. Auctioneering isn't just fast talking, it's reading people. It's feeling hesitation. It's spotting the bidder who wants in but doesn't want to show it. It's knowing when to push, when to pause, and when to let silence do the work. Caleb learned that slowly, and because he had to work harder than everyone else just to sound normal, he developed something a lot of naturally gifted people never do. Precision. By 1979, he had a small but growing reputation. By 1980, he was getting booked outside his county. By 1981, farmers were starting to say the same thing. The stuttering kid, he's actually good. And that was when everything changed. Because the early 1980s hit agriculture hard. Commodity prices softened, interest rates climbed, debt became dangerous. The operations that had expanded too fast suddenly looked fragile. And Vernon Hale had expanded fast. Very fast. During the good years, he borrowed heavily, bought more land, more cattle, more equipment, more storage, more everything. He looked unstoppable. Until he wasn't. By 1983, the pressure was visible. People whispered that he was stretched too thin. Then that he was missing payments. Then that the bank was circling. In early 1984, the rumor became fact. Vernon Hale was being forced to liquidate major assets, land, equipment, livestock, and somebody had to call the auction. Caleb Mercer got the phone call on a cold Tuesday afternoon. The attorney handling the liquidation told him, carefully, that several auctioneers had declined the job. Too political, too uncomfortable, too much history. But Caleb had a reputation now, a real one. And more importantly, he had distance. He wasn't the embarrassed kid on a fairground stage anymore. He was a professional. When he hung up the phone, he sat still for a long time. Because 8 years earlier, in front of the whole county, he had made a promise. And now the day had arrived. The morning of the auction, Caleb got there before sunrise. The Hale property was massive. Tractors lined in rows, implements cleaned and staged. Trailers, tanks, pickups, cattle lots, everything arranged for sale. The scale of it was overwhelming. And then Vernon Hale walked up. He looked older, smaller somehow, less certain. For a few seconds neither man spoke. Then Vernon said, "Guess you got your wish." Caleb looked at him and said something Vernon probably never expected to hear. "I never wished for this." That stopped him, because it was true. Caleb had dreamed of proving himself, not of watching another man lose everything. That mattered, because this story was never really about revenge. It was about dignity. Caleb wasn't there to humiliate Vernon. He wasn't there to get even. He was there to do his job well. And he did. At 10 o'clock, he stepped to the microphone and began. No hesitation, no stutter, just rhythm. Hour after hour, he worked the sale with total control. He read the crowd, built momentum, held attention, pushed prices higher than anyone expected. By the end, people weren't just watching the auction, they were watching him. The same county that once laughed at him was now listening in silence. When the sale ended, the numbers exceeded expectations. Not enough to undo the loss, but enough to make the sale fair. As the crowd began to leave, Vernon Hale walked up one last time. He held out his hand and said quietly, "That was the best auction I've ever seen." Then he looked at Caleb and said, "I laughed at you because I thought I understood weakness. I didn't know a thing about strength." And Caleb never forgot that. Over time, Caleb became one of the most respected auctioneers in the state. Not because his stutter disappeared. It didn't. But behind a microphone, in rhythm, he found his strength. And that's the real lesson. The thing people laugh at, the thing that makes you feel small, might be the very thing that shapes your future. That doesn't mean the pain is easy. It means the story isn't over when people decide who they think you are. Sometimes they're wrong, and sometimes the same people who laughed first end up listening. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more real, human, story-driven videos like this. And if you've ever been laughed at for something you wanted badly, drop a comment below. Because stories like that matter, and a lot more people understand them than you think.